Just thought I'd quickly show you what you're missing. The Cannes Film Festival is open again, really ritzy, you know, Mediterranean, blah, blah, stars, fashion, glamour. We can't go, not as tourists. We're blocked from leaving this country. But have a look there. There's minimal requirements. They're supposedly keeping a metre apart, but I'm not seeing much of that. And they've got to wear a face mask in the screenings, but otherwise it seems party, party, party at Cannes. This is being held in countries, you know, Europe. Italy and France are two tourism destinations. Italy's vaccinated, fully vaccinated, less than a third of its people. France just a bit more. But look, people are allowed to come, tourists are allowed to come if they've been fully vaccinated. Isn't that great? But you can't be there. And here, rather than say, oh, 30% vaccination, that'll do, then we can open up, our politicians are saying 80% fully vaccinated. Only then can we end this health fascism. What a joke. One more point about this new identity politics, and a really weird consequence of it that I don't think our politicians have been thinking of, but they better now. We have had an astonishing number of people change their race. They don't want to be white anymore. They'd rather identify themselves as Aboriginal, to be honest. And there are some obvious examples that we've talked about, like Professor Bruce Pascoe, who has falsely claimed for years that is Aboriginal, and falsely claimed as a historian. It's actually a fabricator. There's other academics I could name. One says she's of the Wininini tribe, of which there's no record anywhere. And as far as I can tell, she's the only member alive of the Wininini, and she won't tell me who else is of this tribe or even where it's based, nor will the university. But look, these people are not alone. They're far from alone, and that's what's creating a problem, especially for government. You see, our last census found that 40,000 Australians who were apparently listed as white the census before must have switched identity and called themselves Aboriginal in the next one. That's because this huge rise in the number of Aborigines could not be explained in the birth rate alone. This is beyond that. Now, as you know, I've written this sort of stuff for years, wondering about all this kind of stuff, and been punished pretty hard for opening my mouth. But now increasingly academics who do identify as Aboriginal, so that makes it okay, are talking about this as well. Just this weekend, for instance, they were complaining about these so-called race shifters. Complaints from academics such as Victoria Grieve-Williams from RMIT University, saying that this race shifting phenomenon is really happening. But it remains, she says, a difficult conversation for Australians to have. And why is that? Because, she says, these race shifters hold the power, because they tend to be urban and professionals, better off, and they stifle debate and resist scrutiny by, for instance, attacking Aboriginal people who ask why or who they are in Aboriginal cultural terms. Who are you? Are you really Aboriginal? I'm glad to hear from Victoria Grieve-Williams. I should remind her that when I raised these issues some years ago, did she support me or attack me? Whatever. Glad we're on the same side now. Glad she's talking about all this, because this big shift is causing a big problem. Joining me is someone who's written about this in Quadrant Online, Peter O'Brien, who also last year pulled apart the Bruce Pascoe hoax in his excellent book, Bitter Harvest. Peter O'Brien, thanks for joining me. Look, you know, I don't really care what race people call themselves. Not a problem. As long as they're not using that race to get special favours, special legal treatment, special funding from government, all that kind of thing as a result, right? If it's their little frolic, fine. I don't want to be part of it, don't want to fund it. But that seems to me to be another problem in this, isn't there?
Well, Andrew, I read that article in The Australian and I immediately thought of you, and I thought you must have read it with a degree of wry amusement, because they seem to be saying exactly what you said that many years ago and got into so much trouble for. It does seem clear from the article that they are not just talking about white imposters, otherwise they would have used that term. I would say Pascoe is not a race shifter, he's a white imposter or a race imposter. So the term suggests that these academics are now concerned that well-off, well-educated Aboriginal people, even the genuinely Aboriginal people, people who can make genuine claims to Aboriginality, are now causing a distortion of the statistics that are used to measure the gap between Aboriginals and the rest of the community. I would add, though, that I think that's probably an oversimplification, because I'm sure they use a lot more metrics other than just the number of people who identify as Aboriginal. But it seems to me that the wheels come full circle, and they are now concerned that that people who are genuine Aborigines and may well have the a desire to identify in the sense that they can be proud of the heritage that they have, but other than that, they shouldn't be lining up with their hand out for the public largesse. And a lot of the people who are in this are in fact in the education sector.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. When you look at most of the key people we hear from now, they're clearly people that form this urban elite that we're talking, that these Aboriginal activists are now talking about, or academics are talking about. I want to come back, though. I'm not quite as convinced as you that this makes no difference to the closing of the gap measurements. I mean, if you think we've added 40,000 people, a lot of them would be younger, they'd have children as well, to the body of people that we're studying when we calculate the closing the gap measurements, which is how far behind Aboriginal children are on reading standards, for instance, maths, literacy, science. We've been seeing for years now that these figures are barely shifting in the right direction. That's worrying enough to me, really worrying. I've talked about this for decades now. But if we've got all these urban Aborigines, much better assimilated, a lot of professionals in there, and their children are being part of these stats, that means, I would have thought, that in traditional areas, out bush, the standards are actually falling.
I absolutely agree with you, Andrew. I made the point in my article that if the imposters such as Pascoe and so on, the people who are well educated, the white imposters are distorting the stats, then equally the well educated urban Aboriginals are doing exactly the same thing, and it gets back to the point you made some years ago that people are lining up and taking money that should be directed towards the people who are genuinely in need.
Peter O'Brien, I think this is a really amazing issue. I'm so interested to see how it's now coming out into public discussion, and I would dare the critics to now shout racist at these Aboriginal academics who are raising the same matter as well. We shall see.
Andrew,
Peter O'Brien,
I wonder if I could just raise the point that I found it ironic that Dr. Grieve Williams talked about race shifters that were calling out or being shouted down when they tried to, the genuine Aborigines were being shouted down by the race shifters when they tried to call out these people, and yet I recall that it was Josephine Cashman when she called out the most obvious example of race shifting or imposture, if you like to use the term, that she was shouted down not by race shifters or white people, but by the cream of the Aboriginal establishment.
That's so true. That is so true. Peter O'Brien, thanks again for your time.